Hello. Greetings from Policy Advocacy Research Center and Mumbai Tarun Bharat. I welcome one and all. I am Ruchita Rani, the Network Development and Strategic Alliance Head at Policy Advocacy Research Center, and I'm indeed extremely delighted to welcome Shri Ashish Kumar Chauhan ji. Namaste. As all of us know, Ashish ji is the Managing Director and the CEO at BSE, Bombay Stock Exchange, and as such, he needs no introduction. But at the outset, let me first take this opportunity to congratulate Sir for his very recent appointment as the Chancellor of one of the oldest universities, that is the University of Allahabad at Prayagraj. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
So, taking it further, I would also take this opportunity to congratulate on one more accord, because I'm sure all of us know that today BSE is at 51,000. So, congratulations on that accord as well. And let us take it ahead. So, as a very formal introduction to Shri Ashish Kumar Chauhan ji, I'm sure we are all happy to know that Ashish ji is a technocrat, has been through the IIT, through the IIM, and it is indeed this bank of knowledge that has resulted in all his endeavors, the fruition of which we see as he has progressed across so many years. Ashish ji has been the initiator of what we know today as the fastest exchange in the world with 6 microseconds response time. Apart from the IPO, the revival of revenues, the introduction of the mobile stock trading to India, the diversified areas when it comes to currency, commodities, and equity derivatives with the SMEs, with the SMEs, the startups, the mutual fund distribution. Apart from that, a very recent one, which is the agri spot market, the power trading, and the international exchange at GIFT Gandhinagar. So prior to this, we all know that Ashish ji had been associated with the Reliance, with the IPL cricket team, and all that spanning years from 2000 to 2009, after which he has been relentlessly working towards BSE and to all the provisions that we see today as the benefits from BSE are thanks to Ashish ji. Ashish ji has also been one of the founders of NSE, that is the National Stock Exchange, and he is considered to be the father of modern financial derivatives and the creator of the Nifty Index. The first screen trading is all thanks to him. So he has, to his credit, a long list of credentials, obviously, and with such credentials, it is obvious that one would want to applaud him, and he is also the recipient of several prestigious Indian and international awards across 3 decades. He has been given the title of the Digital Icon of the Year, an Asian banker, and with all this to his credit, there is a giving back to society, and he does that in the form of being a visiting faculty and guidance to several of the IIMs in the country, the NIITs, and now in his new role as maybe guidance to the University of Allahabad, that will be his continued offerings and contributions. Apart from that, he is also the distinguished visiting faculty to the Ryerson University in Toronto and the honorary professor of Nottingham University, the Business School. Well, with so much, there is always a culmination into learning into writing. And Ashish ji has, to his credit, being the author of the book A Temple of Wealth Creation. And apart from that, his own Sthita Prajna, the process of maintaining equilibrium. At this point, Ashish ji, this may be a little personal, but being able to pen down your thoughts into these in the form of these 2 books, just at the outset, what books and authors have inspired you in this direction?
In a way, I read a lot, so a lot of authors since childhood. That includes the people who wrote Vedas or Upanishads, or talked about Smriti, and from there on to Gautam Buddha, and so from our own culture, and ancient culture, we have had so many people who wrote nice things, talked nice things, and also conceptualized the world in their own way. And similarly, since childhood, I've been reading a lot. So from Leo Tolstoy to a lot of Russians, I've read because of the fact that Russian Federation used to translate their books in Indian local languages when I was young, and used to give it for free. And so that's how I learned, because I studied in a local language, and I did not have access to English books those days. And so, in some ways, when I kind of started reading English, since there, I have been reading all sorts of fiction, non-fiction books, but of late I read a lot of fiction, and more in finance, but also in sciences. And so it has been a varied sort of inspiration. Some of the more sort of interesting thought leaders of business, that includes Ram Charan, who wrote books with Larry Bossidy on execution, and he's considered a great consultant across the world, stays in New York, although of Indian origin. And not many of us celebrate those people often. But Peter Bernstein or Alvin Toffler, and literally, I would be reading probably 10, 20 books at any point in time simultaneously. And so when I get impressed by a lot of people, and including our current leaders, opposition leaders, and our professors, our religious leaders. And so, it's a what I call ongoing process of learning, and I think hopefully that will continue for future.
Indeed, indeed. So, taking on from there, let us enter into your other world, which has spanned so many decades. So, let us today we are talking on a topic that is the pivotal role of financial markets in channelizing capital for the socio-economic development of emerging states in India. So, emerging states in India would obviously include also the Union Territory. And the reason why we thought we would discuss on this is because today we see a lot of changes happening. We have seen how a state like Uttar Pradesh has also moved from a lower position to position 2 when it comes to its economic and other progress. So, which means to say that there is something happening, and that is because of which we see this kind of a change. So, I'd at the start, maybe it would be nice if you can share your views about how what is the larger role that a financial market would take in channelizing these the capital towards to these states, to the emerging states in India?
In a way, for me, the emerging states would be a nomenclature we continue with because of the past. Today, every citizen pretty much sitting in the remotest Arunachal Pradesh or remotest sort of Kashmir Valley or Ladakh has access to the same information and same knowledge as a person sitting in Mumbai, because of this great modern gadget called mobile telephone, which is also giving you data. And I think the world, which used to look very far, very distant for most of us coming from rural areas or remote areas, suddenly has collapsed in a sort of a heap within a very short time. When I was young, age 20, 21, and learning economics in a business school, we were told that why Western countries are rich is because they have connectivity. And if all Indians have phones at their home, then it will increase India's GDP permanently by 2% per annum every year. And I used to think, how would that be possible, and when that would be possible? And when I started working on telecom early on in my career, and then later on I worked on bringing what you now know as mobile revolution around 2000 to 2005 onwards, the kind of speed with which India adapted to the new technology was amazing. And for me, that's why I would say that there are three Indias. There is what I call the bullock cart India, and then there is a mail, sort of a mail train India, and then there is bullet train India, right? These three Indians are simultaneously running, and you as an individual are some portion in bullock cart India, and some portion in the mail area, and some portion in the bullet train. And so every Indian is a mix of all these various types of speeds which we are observing. And in some sense, the financialization, the true financialization started happening around 2014 for Indian masses. We did have great ideas while nationalizing Indian banks. We wanted to reach out to every Indian citizens in 1970s and make Indian banking system available. We were basically not a financially inclusive system for very long. And a lot of money was spent on discussing, debating, and doing seminars on financial inclusion, including, I think, a lot of efforts under Prime Minister under Manmohan Singh's time, that I would have probably spoken on financial inclusion a few hundred or probably 1,000 times in 10 years. But effectively, when 2014 happened and the new central government started providing Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile connectivity and also opened literally 30-40 crore new accounts connected to your mobile phone, so you didn't have to go to the branches. They also allowed the correspondence banking in terms of people moving on cycles and bikes to basically become your bankers. I think those were the ideas, those were the execution, because ideas are many. But the way this Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity was executed, I think it was phenomenal. And India has now become what I call the fintech hub of the world. And sitting in Arunachal Pradesh today, even one of the e-commerce employees at a very high level told me that largest amount of demands they are getting is not from cities. They're getting from Arunachal and Meghalaya and remote sort of villages, because now even the housewife sitting there is able to actually order things online and receive it, which was absolutely impossible even say 10 years back or 20 years back. And so for me, India has suddenly become a one single nation, as if we are sitting all side by side rather than very remote. And I think in terms of acceleration, the markets have played a phenomenal role. I'm not talking about only the stock markets or the banking markets, but overall, the market-driven economy is a great leveler. And also it spreads all the influences, all the tremors that happen across the world in a very short time. And the faster it spreads out, you will see that India would also be connected to the world. Today, in some ways, from knowledge perspective, a person or a student who is the richest person's son in the world, that is, say, Bill Gates' son, versus a person sitting in Ichilkaranji, a young boy or girl, they actually can learn from the same great portal called khanacademy.org. And in fact, Bill Gates told in one of his interviews that I teach when I learn with my son on khanacademy.org. And it's free. You don't have to be buying 1 lakh rupee, 2 lakh rupee like stuff from this stuff. Of course, if you have money to spare, you can do that. But broadly, the knowledge and wisdom that comes from great teachers is available to you for free, right? And so I keep on saying that now every Eklavya can learn in India, and now the Dronacharya will not take away your thumb, right? So it is very becoming, India is becoming very egalitarian. And it is beyond today the imagination of the policymakers, academia, the chatterati, the discussion class, US, Europe, wherever they try to influence us. We have gone far beyond, right? Today, when I speak at UN or Europe about how good India has become in fintech, even Indians can't believe because last year India did more transactions of mobile trade, in fact, mobile commerce transactions than uh, China by probably 50-60%. And China is considered hugely mobile commerce oriented country. Or e transactions in India are now the largest in the world, right? US is like 1/5, 1/6 of us. And we are growing at a pace which is unheard of, like 100%, 200% year on year. And that is because of Jandan Aadhaar Mobile and, of course, the data connectivity reaching out to every nook and corner. And those are the things which no academics, no discussion has even taken into account. And so we keep on reading what I call the people who used to read from abroad, and they tell us that you have to do this. And many discussions, I say that we are way beyond what you can even think.
True.
Today, we are the thought leaders. Today, we are the execution leaders.
Right.
Not US,
Right.
not Europe, not China. Just that they are rich
Correct.
because they're past doings, not today.
Right.
The future wealth will be created in India because Indians are basically now what I call 21st century ready.
Right.
Whereas the rest of the world is in 18th century, 19th century, in China is in 20th century. We have just leapfrogged pretty much 3 centuries
Right.
in a very short time. And that's what I think when you look back, you don't get to learn too many lessons. When you look ahead,
Right.
you anticipate. For me, what is happening in India now is going to happen in US after 20 years, provided US remains alert, right? And it's interesting how these things are happening in markets, in market after market, from buying medicines. When you are able to get 30-40% discounts anywhere in the country with complete comfort and also surety that you are not going to get spurious drugs, right? And every market I see is changing in front of you. There was no time in the history of the world, and especially history of India, that the changes happened so rapidly. That has happened over last 5-10 years, and specifically in COVID times, because the trends that would have become apparent over 5, 10, 20 years have suddenly become accelerated because we couldn't come out of home, right? And across the country. And that's where I think the digitization of Indian economy has gone beyond what one could have imagined. And new jobs, of course, have been created. But the governance that has happened, what they call e-governance, nobody, no government in the world does the way we do things. With again Jandan Aadhaar Mobile and this vaccination, COVID, and it is unbelievable. And I think it's bringing that transparency, that trust back into the governance, which was pretty much not there. And that's why Indian democracy is going to chart its own course going forward. And I would urge Park to also look at what is coming and create its own lessons, because India is going through a change and the pace of change which has no parallel. And so it's very difficult to learn from others, except from if you collapse 300-400 years of the Western development into, say, 30 years and then start learning those lessons.
Right. So what you're saying is right, is that on one end it's technology, and the other end it's the wealth of thought and wisdom that has been able to bring us to this level when it comes to finance, when it comes to market. Agreed. Yet nevertheless, and of course the government of India, whether it's at the central level or at the state level, has been instrumental in bringing about a lot of changes in terms of their schemes and their policies, which would facilitate better investment or better market opportunity for industry in various aspects, whether it is the manufacturing sector or whether it is the service sector. The provision of this is there, and it is the channelization is through technology. Agreed, definitely. But ultimately, it is to a large extent, it is the physical or the bringing of an industry to that particular area which is necessary to drive it. Like when you take the example of, let us say, Jammu and Kashmir, they have established the JKTPO, the Trade Promotion Organization. Or when you look at Tripura and the Northeast, they have these developmental schemes. You have land allocation policies. All these are there. But eventually, it is only when we are able to get that industry, whether it is pharma, whether it is agro or processing or any of these, physically there, much as technology driven and all that is there, even in the actual execution, yet getting them there would probably channelize the finances into that area, channelize development at both the socio and the economic development, both aspects. Like you have said earlier, Park definitely is a think tank which works at the for the socio-economic development of development and in various areas, various sectors. So how do you think BSE as an institution in itself could facilitate bringing more industry into these regions for accelerating their development?
See, I think one thing one should keep in mind is it is what I call comparative world. And in some ways, um, India is not the only country where people will want to set up things, right? So India will have to compete with the rest of the world in terms of the market. Of course, we are a large market and a large future market. So naturally, if you are local, you will have a lot of sort of advantages vis-a-vis something coming from abroad. But having said that, you would also want to have infrastructure to connect to different nooks and corners of India. You give example of Jammu Kashmir or Tripura, and so we will have to develop that infrastructure to reach out to them, so that even the raw material which is produced there reaches out to other parts of India and the world, and also in case you set up industry there, you are going to be able to sort of send the raw material from other parts of the world and become part of the what I call world supply chain. Because there is nothing today in the world which is made everything into one place.
Right.
A lot of components move across the world and move at a speed which is unheard of, unthinkable, and most of the academics have not yet kind of caught up on that speed. And that's why whatever is possible, I think every state government have to basically work on creating infrastructure in the areas they want to operate in, and also the basic infrastructure like electricity, water, roads, transport, those kind of things would be what I call minimum hygiene. And if you give that, that itself is going to take up that state's GDP or that district's GDP by literally 2, 3, 5% per annum more for probably next 10, 20 years, because the movement of goods and services and also of people from that region into the rest of the country and rest of the world is going to be amazing. And one of the larger issues with India has been that in the soft infrastructure, like digital part, we are pretty much now world leaders. But in the hard infrastructure, we are pretty much still the laggards, right? And so somewhere on the line, if you look at, say, Maharashtra or Gujarat, they developed very early. And we don't, if you have not traveled in the interiors of India, other than Gujarat, Maharashtra, probably Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, you would not sort of experience the hardships which people have in traveling even short distances. And so one example I would give you is like I used to go to Varanasi for some or other work, say 10 years back, and to go from airport to the city used to be like 1.5, 2 hours, and today 15 minutes, because the infrastructure, the road and all the bridges and all those things got built. And similarly, say Varanasi to Allahabad, it's going to be like a 8-lane. I just read about Delhi Meerut 16-lane highway, right? And so you realize what used to take you 7, 8, 10 hours is now going to take you 1 hour, 2 hours, right? And that is basically bringing India together. And also the people now pretty much from Meerut with all the metros and the new roads, people may be able to travel literally for jobs. And so people's ability to move around becomes larger, getting jobs become larger, getting special skills become larger, getting trained becomes faster. And so on and so forth. Of course, the internet also helps. But idea is, if Jammu Kashmir wants to develop or Meghalaya wants to develop, they'll have to figure out where they want to spend their precious money which they have. Uh, because each state will have demand from literally all sources, right? And everyone wants the best for themselves. But they'll have to ration because the money is in short supply. And so they'll have to figure out how to execute. They'll have to take private sector help to set up some of the infrastructure, some of the industries. And once you have industries, infrastructure also develops. So it's like a chicken and egg. And so they will have to also ensure that our laws and regulations are basically business friendly. Most of our laws, regulations, even our ways of administering are what I call British Raj oriented, right? They were more to control than to facilitate. And so we'll have to change, and that would basically require a lot of laws to be changed or removed, because many of them may be not required today. And also create newer regulations to ensure that the Inspector Raj, which has still remained and probably is becoming stronger, actually becomes more facilitating orientation rather than control orientation. And those kind of things, if you're able to do, I think any state in India today has great young population, which is tax savvy, which is able to learn newer things faster and would be able to develop. So in addition to attracting them using BSE's platform, which I would urge every state government to do, including Jammu Kashmir or Tripura or Meghalaya, to come work with BSE to meet the investors, to meet the entrepreneurs who will want to come and set up in your states facilities, manufacturing facilities, services facilities, and everything else. But also work with infrastructure providers to provide that infrastructure, and work with their own bureaucracy, central and state level, to ensure that they become pretty much the best state to attract businesses. And for me, um, however much wealth we create using newer technologies, which we will, I have no doubt in my mind, but even the old businesses will give livelihood to so many more people if we are able to reform ourselves and provide better infrastructure. And that's what BSE will always work with every state in India, irrespective of whoever is the ruling party. But the idea would be to ensure that the industry also has a expectation from the local governments, not only in the subsidies they may get, but more importantly, when they come there, what kind of hassles they have to go through in getting approvals, local issues, the labor and other things. And that's where I think India today is has to become what I call, as much as states compete with each other for revenues, they will also have to compete with each other for getting industries, and also the industries which they think are going to benefit their local economy, use their local resources. And of course, on top of that, the layer of the high tech, which you can do from anywhere in the country. And so if you can attract in Tripura a TCS, or in Meghalaya Infosys, a campus for them, it would be a win-win. And I have seen in Tamil Nadu, people are now going into villages and hiring young boys and girls at age 18, 19, when they are not even graduating in the IT. And that could be done in pretty much Jammu Kashmir or in MP or in UP. And that's what, I think the world is open for business, and state will have to provide what I call reasonable living framework, reasonable law and order, electricity, water, and other things. And I think many things are being, of course, cleanliness Swachh Bharat has done wonderful job. But idea is, how do we now declog the cities and take the citizens into the hinterland where they can have better lifestyle, better money, uh, but also can do the world-beating work sitting in remote areas because of the way the digital economy works.
Right. Taking from there, when you said about infrastructure and you were getting in the youth, today we see a lot of startups, and many of the startups are, of course, they are, most of them behind them are young minds. They are clubbed with technology quite often in most of the startups. So these startups, on one end, I mean, most of it, what hampers their way ahead, though they have good concepts, is sometimes and most often funds and someone to take it ahead. BSc themselves have an incubator and are into the space of supporting startups. But I'm looking at another aspect of it, that is the Indian diaspora. We have from the International Financial Service Center that BSc has as India INX at Gujarat. So there is an opportunity of international fund coming in. There are masala bonds and these kind that have been floated. So, how is it that BSE and in collaboration with others, institutions, and all, can take ahead this aspect of the Indian diaspora as well as the Indians who can avail of these bonds to support startups? And in what way can BSE be helpful in driving a campaign of this sort or allowing them to have a platform for this kind of a connection? Because the Indian diaspora is very keen on bringing on in supporting the country, in supporting initiatives, but somewhere there has to be a collaborative thought process and a functioning. So would BSE like to team up or offer a platform for something like this, given the fact that you have a big platform yourself as plus as the India INX on the other end with the international thing? So what do you think in
No,
this
it's
regard?
happening as we say, as we speak. Like India INX has been able to raise close to $50 billion of bonds for Indian corporates from abroad. And people don't even know, Indian newspapers don't even sort of take notice because in some ways it's not exciting. Right? Raising funds may be necessary, food may be necessary, but it's not exciting.
Correct.
And so that's how I say that a lot of important news don't become urgent or don't get known. But INX, the purpose of setting up GIFT City was also to create a lot of high-paying jobs in finance, but also to raise money for Indian corporates and Indian governments of various types, from municipalities to state to central government, to do infrastructure projects through raising bonds abroad. And so it's happening as we talk. GIFT City Exchange, INX, also trades probably close to $15 to $20 billion of derivatives a day in equities, in currencies, in commodities like gold and many other things. So it's becoming basically a big center for transactions. And as you rightly said, the diaspora was not even allowed to invest to that by RBI till this year. Only this year they are allowing. And so slowly mindsets are changing, things are changing. And hopefully the GIFT City will become India's window into the world, like the way Hong Kong was to China for last 30, 40 years. And Hong Kong helped China develop immensely, despite their war with their real differences with Taiwan. Most of the money from Taiwan in getting invested into China went through Hong Kong. And similarly, from the Chinese diaspora across the world, went through Hong Kong into China, and that helped that country. And I think even non-Chinese diaspora also invested through Hong Kong in many, many ways. And that's what can happen through GIFT City into India. I have no doubt about it. And we are pretty much working with everyone who wants to come. Of course, the rules, regulations are defined. They are put in on the websites of various government authorities. Government has also now created a single regulator called IFSCA, who is sitting in GIFT City, who is trying to also promote the trading and business through GIFT City. And so now pretty much most pieces are in place. It's a tax free area, and so it attracts many different type of people. So for me, I have no doubt that what BSc started with Honorable Prime Minister uh, 7 8 years back, in fact 9 years
Okay.
back, when he visited BSc for the first time as a CM of Gujarat. I think that dream is coming to fruition. Of course, it has taken longer than we expected, but I think most pieces are in place now, and that should be able to move fast. In terms of the Indian uh, domestic area, you can set up your AIF, that is alternative investment funds. You can set up your mutual funds. You can set up your company in GIFT City, and then you can come into the domestic area to invest into small companies, large companies, what have you, and of course you can also invest through the BSc startup segment or SME segment or BSc's incubators. One in BSc building in Mumbai and one in Varanasi at Banaras University. And BSc is also tying up with many incubators to create a network of incubators across the country, so that those young boys and girls who are starting businesses can interact with the mentors and experts and angel investors and venture capitalists from India and abroad to sort of ensure that they are able to realize their dream if that dream is actually practical. And many times when I have been a young entrepreneur myself, and whatever you read in newspapers, whenever you read newspapers, you think $1 billion company is called startup. It is not startup. It is a large company with a lot of money, and they also pay some of that money to get publicity to be called startup, because startup is a. I mean, everyone, human nature is to like young kids and all, right? So that's how it's a nomenclature which they have invented called startup. But real startups very seldom get funding, and that's why my understanding was that if you can create a platform for young companies, even mid-age companies, to raise funds, it'll be interesting. And that's how we started SME segment in 2012, and it has worked out wonderfully. Today, the market capitalization of the companies listed there, more than 340 companies, is now 26,000 crore rupees. And this is money where wealth has been created. It's not subsidy.
Correct.
Right? And so I keep on telling that there are smarter ways to create entrepreneurship rather than just doling out subsidies and getting nothing in return. While as the number of jobs they have created are immense, many of these 340 companies, almost 90 plus companies, have gone to the main board. And so they have grown that much. And the total funds raised is close to 3,500 crores. So literally 3,500 crore raise has now created wealth of 26,000 crores. Okay. And every day we are getting newer companies. This 2021, 22 will probably list 60, 70 more new companies. And despite COVID, right? Okay. And so similarly, startups, we started during the COVID time, in the peak of COVID, that we need to have a platform for even younger companies, even newer companies which have no funds. Even you can raise 1 crore rupees. When it's difficult to get 1 BHK in Mira Road in 1 crore, you are able to raise funds from unknown people. And 10, 11 companies have got listed there also. So for me, my job at BSc, which has been there, of course, for every CEO of BSc for the last 140, 60 years, is to act as a catalyst to channelize the savings of Indian economy in more productive areas, right? And that now the time has come where you create what I call non-linear wealth, right, using young brains. Earlier, you have to put in a lot of money to create a lot of wealth. And that's why it was called capitalism. Now I say that new world is what I call capitalism without capital. You can create more wealth, more capital without even putting a lot of capital. But small capital may be required. And that I need to make available to youngsters. And that's why the startup segment or SME segment or incubators were started. And they've matured in their own way. They are the top models for world to follow. Today, the UNCTAD and UN and Milken Foundation, what have you, they call us to learn. They send researchers to learn how BSc developed market for raising $200,000, $100,000. Because what happens when you go to create raise funds from the public market, the cost of raising funds becomes manifold, because you have to kind of market, you have to create prospectors, you have to involve lawyers and many things. And so minimum ticket size becomes like 50, $100 million in foreign countries, before which you can raise funds. And literally, if you are below $150 million in US, you don't have a chance to list on larger exchanges. While in India, even 1 crore, which is $120,000 company, $130,000 company, is able to list, right? And that is the beauty of Indian Indian ingenuity, that we have been able to bring down those costs, and still unknown people who don't know the promoters, are able to list in his ideas or her ideas, and with the hope that when that company becomes 100 times larger or 1,000 times larger, then they will get the benefit of that, right? And they have seen in 1990s there was no IT sector in India,
Right.
And even in US some green shoots were there, and they had Nasdaq, which was coming up. But there was a young company called Infosys which came to market, and nobody knew IT sector. Nobody had any hope about it, and that company tried to raise very little amount, and people didn't even understand. They did not fill that issue fully, subscribe to it fully, and underwriters had to actually pay for the remaining portion. And those underwriters became billionaires by default because that company did so well.
Correct.
And after that, so many IT companies came. They took so much money from public and created wealth, and of course, so many millions of jobs for the country. That I have no doubt in my mind that we will have literally thousands of Infosys, thousands of Wipros coming out of our startup platform or SME platform going forward. And that is for me the beauty of the BSE, that it has created that trusted platform for 146 years. We are literally the only developing market with a per capita income of $2,000 having this kind of robust stock market. Even developed countries do not have the robustness of our markets which raise funds. Last year alone, BSE helped Indian corporates raise 18.52 lakh crores. 18.52 lakh crore is almost equivalent to India's budget. Okay?
Right.
And we helped India raise during peak of COVID $253 billion, right? And why it has happened is because the trust has been created. Of course, there are some companies will go up, do better. Some companies will go down. People will lose money. But overall, Indian capital markets today are using Indian capital or even foreign capital for that matter in a way which is much more efficient than Indian banking system. Right. And that's why more and more people are coming to invest in Indian capital markets. You can see the market capitalization of India is now $3 trillion. Yes. India's stocks alone, right? And that is also telling you that almost 33% of India's wealth is now in that big trust. Of unknown people investing in unknown businesses. They are not going to visit those businesses, but they have that trust that Indian government will work, Indian regulators will work, Indian exchange will work to get them that information. And whenever the profits happen, it'll go to that proportion of their shareholding will come to their account. And so it's so beautifully created by quirk of fate, you can say, by the way Indian society works, the way Indian society has evolved. But I think the existence of BSE and it becoming that $3 trillion market capitalization last week is, I think, phenomenal. And BSE will continue to basically act as a catalyst for all the ideas to create that wealth for the nation which has been deprived to Indian masses for almost 1,000 years now. It's the rightful time for Indians to come out, create their businesses. Other people will invest in them for sure. And who knows? I mean, today also India is now the second largest what I call startup nation in the world in terms of number of startups. India is an unbelievable number of startups, and every year we are growing like mad in terms of number of startups. So I have no doubt we have tremendous enthusiasm in our youngsters, and small little money is required. If venture capitalists don't give you, angel investors don't give you, come to BSE. We'll get it for you.
So do you see much of startups coming from these areas like Jammu Kashmir or from the Northeast, and with the global capital moving, shifting the fulcrum, shifting towards the Indo-Pacific, where these become very strategic in position. I mean, in position as well as in the developmental phase. So, do you see startups coming from these regions? And also, joint with that, would PSC think of having one international financial service center in these regions? Would it? How would BSc facilitate that, and if it makes sense to have them there? Because these are places where, like all that you have said, is definitely very, very inspiring, and at the same time, it is something which builds confidence in people to want to invest and want to be in this space. But when it comes to such regions which are, which even after so many years are yet to, really, I wouldn't say make a mark, they are in their own space, but with these parameters in place, then they do have a long way to go. So, in what way would BSc be able to serve them as a platform, or be able to have subsidies, or what would we call as satellite centers or something in these areas to facilitate it at a better level, given that technology is still there, but the presence sometimes makes a difference?
BSc has presence in 22 cities
Right.
across the country. And in sort of many areas. I myself used to go to Manipur often because I was also chairman of NIT Manipur. And so for me, today I have merchant bankers, I have stockbrokers who will get you the funds in pretty much every state in India, whether you are in Tripura. And at the same time, the awareness is low of how to start a business, what to do, what it means to basically list your company, because the responsibilities go up. You start having so many more partners. So the responsibility for transparency goes up and so on. So the training is a little less. And so those are the things we do by creating awareness with various local chapters of chambers of commerce and local sort of colleges and other things. Like for Jammu Kashmir, we are trying to create a new program to make youth as entrepreneurs, but financial entrepreneurs. So we are training on our own several thousand youth in becoming mutual fund agents or insurance agents. So what happens is our team goes to any city which the government, state government wants us to do. They give us the room in a college, and they also give the number of students. We teach them, train them for a month or two, and then make them give exams, which are required for becoming a mutual fund agent or an insurance. After they pass the exams, and there is no cost to those youngsters, and those costs are taken care of either by us or by the state governments. And then they will also train them after licensing on how to come on the BSc platform as an insurance agent or a mutual fund agent or other things. BSc also has now an agricultural marketplace, so they can actually also sell their rice or sell their apples on that on a wholesale basis. And so we are training these youngsters, and some of them will become great insurance agents or great mutual fund agents, and they'll start getting commissions. And so for me, the modern technology used with the right intention would go a long way. Of course, BSc being a single institution would continue to focus more on the areas in which it requires to. And if you want money from abroad, you don't require IFSC to be set up in every home or every state. Today, 20% of BSc's own stocks are owned by foreigners through the same means of listing the company. So if you come on list on BSc, however small your business is, you will pretty much be eligible to get money from anywhere in the world. And there are literally 7 crore Indians who are investing through BSc. 7 crore. If you look at it in terms of the number of population, Switzerland's entire population is 1 crore. Correct. Right? And Singapore is probably 30, 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs. New Zealand is 50 lakhs. So BSc is now, if it was a nation, it would be in top probably 15 nations in the world. Right. And that's why you access to so many investors directly. It is unbelievable. And so you just come to BSc, nearest office you have, or whenever we do seminars in your cities or nearby towns, come, I mean, we have done, I have personally gone to Srinagar even as recent as last October during COVID times for seminar. And my colleagues keep on doing seminars across the year. Like last year, we would have conducted 8,000 seminars. And through television, through print, through internet, we do literally thousands of seminars a year. You can participate if you have a chamber of association of industries or even IT sort of companies. Please get together, invite us. We'll set up for experts to mentor you, come to you, and of course, whenever we want to raise funds, we'll organize some merchant bankers for you. So it's the works which comes, but it's like if we say that I will sit at home, keep on thinking, but will not move myself, then it is difficult to help you, right?
Right.
So the desperation currently seems to be that somehow the government has to do something for me, or BSc has to do, or somebody else has to do something for me. Most of the time, we are teaching that wrong. It is that you have to have that enthusiasm, you have to have that uh, courage, gumption to reach out with other experts or directly, and people are willing to help. Of course, you will go through a lot of difficulties, but if you think that sitting at home or not meeting out, even not calling, but somehow we have to reach out to you, I think you are mistaken, right? So I don't want to give a wrong impression that it's BSc's job to get you money.
Right.
It is your job to come to BSc, tell your story, go through all the processes that are required to go through, and then hopefully out of those 7 crore investors, which are becoming pretty large every year, uh, some of them will find your stories interesting, your numbers interesting, you trustworthy of taking their money and becoming their partners. And who knows, you may be able to create Infosys in future.
Right. So ultimately, it's about they being able to know that there is an opportunity. So advocacy plays a big role in being able to, for people to know it's what, like you said, that there is a whole lot of opportunity, and obviously they will have to come to BSc. But for them to know that it is there, that there is something like this, there are platforms like this, and they can avail of it, is most important. So I'm sure that the states, wherever this need is being able to understand that there is a whole lot of potential in being there. And as you know, that PARC has been, Policy Advocacy Research Center has been in the space of being able to drive policy changes where required, also bring about the advocacy through in-depth research in connection with us. I think it will be good that we'll be able to take what you have to say at what are the facilities that are there to be at BSc, and which will enable the emerging states to come in and avail of those benefits. I think it will be useful to work together with a whole lot of players and then make it reach out to them. On one last note, only on this, this question is regarding you're recently being appointed as the chancellor at the University of Allahabad. I'm sure, of course, this is not an executive position, but nevertheless, how do you see you being instrumental in, because since you've had a whole lot of experience in the state earlier as well, how do you see your position helping the state at the state of Uttar Pradesh and otherwise in this capacity?
In a way, I think Uttar Pradesh is doing exceedingly well in terms of its infrastructure creation, in terms of its law and order, in terms of even the growth of the economy year on year. So, in some ways, whatever is possible in my area, of course, certainly every state has a claim on BSc, being a national institution. And so we do provide that help. In fact, recently, 2 municipalities from Uttar Pradesh raised the funds from using BSc's bond platform to do infrastructure projects for for those specific cities. But I think those are what I call experimental stage. Once all the municipalities understand in UP how this needs to be done and why it needs to be done, I'm sure literally thousands of cities. I mean, UP is one of the largest states in India, but it's also, if it were a country, it would be in probably top
top.
5 or top 6 countries in the world, right? So it's a very large state, and it has its own issues which would be there for any large state, right? And so whatever is possible for any one of us to do, we must do. And in some ways, because I have been now sort of appointed in a role which is non-executive in an academic institution, I'm also known as an academic by although not in financial circle, because in some ways I also wear IT head. So I'm known as IT person in IT circles and finance person in financial circles, but I'm also known as an academic in academic circles. And so whatever we can do to provide the connect to the network within India with entrepreneurs, with professors, with their professionals, and also abroad. I think that would be pretty much what is required to be done to open our eyes. And for me, the talent in India is unbelievable. The enthusiasm in Indian youth is sort of, when we were young, we were not so driven, right? So today's youth, I think, has a lot of wisdom, a lot of understanding, and I think if you can basically connect them to the more productive areas, the rest of the country and rest of the world, I think in a way, a professor's job or a institution job is to ignite your thought process, right? Take you in the right direction. I think every university should do that. And today, what you think that you were able to impart earlier through college education is now actually available even on internet. So in some ways, the institutions will have to also change them to the newer ways of doing things. And so for me, somewhere in the line, India's good time is just happening. It's just beginning. And probably next 30, 40, 50 years, you will see huge amount of changes in India's education system, India's every walk of life. And that's where basically, I have tremendous hope and tremendous sort of confidence that the next 50 years will create tremendous wealth for the rest of the world, but more so for India. And India will come into what I call middle income countries in that next 30, 40 years. So that's where I think the education as a catalyst at the right time. And when you start from age 3, 4, doing formal education till probably age 20, 21, and the most formative time of anyone's life, right? And so it's going to be amazing. But one caution that when I was young, we were taught that you learn a skill till age 25, and then you can live on that skill for next 50, 60 years. Today, the skills are becoming obsolete very fast. And so whatever you learn till age 25, actually skills may become obsolete probably every 5 years, 10 years. And so you'll have to unlearn those skills and learn newer skills. So we'll have to also prepare our youth for sort of that mindset that whatever you learn may not get you sort of the jobs or vocation for long, because they may learn from their parents or their grandparents or the people around them that those guys did that way. But no, your life is going to be different. And so be ready and be aware. And also you'll have to continue to go back to the universities every 5, 10 years to learn newer and new things.
So it's ultimately about honing your skills and keeping your axe sharpened at all times.
And also
so learning and newer skills, exactly. So skilling is, education on one part, thought building on the other, but the right kind of skilling, I won't say the right kind, but the type that is required time and again, that's most important, I think. And that I am sure that will be an area which our country and all aspects, all those who are instrumental in it will focus, because skilling is the most, is going to be a very significant game changer as we move on. So this has been really wonderful interacting with you, and I'm so happy that you were able to take the time out given your commitments. And I'm sure the audience will take back all these points in terms of very practical and doable. Just that they have to take the first step ahead, and BSEs and your team is always there to support. So on this happy note, thank you so much for being with us in conversation. And I'm sure our team, because we have a team that works of research scholars that are ever ready to work, and they're learning newer ways to better look at policies, better look at the changes that are around, and be instrumental in taking this ahead. So I'm sure our research scholars will also interact with you as we move ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you. Dhanyavad.